Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Dear students, literature has got many genres. When we study literature, we come across novel, we come across drama, poetry, prose, but it is poetry which has given a lot of problem to many of the students. Though it is a very delightful genre, but students, they find it difficult to understand because poetry cannot be taken on a literal level. It has to be interpreted, and it has to be interpreted very intelligently, because it is a piece of writing in which the words, they are arranged in separate lines. That means not necessarily a sentence which begins has to end with a full stop. One line of poetry can continue to another line without a full stop. Then another important thing that we see in poetry is that it has got a rhyme, and the words, they are chosen for their sounds, and the words, if we want to use another beautiful comparison, the words are themselves images. That is, when a poet is writing poetry, he can be compared to a painter, as a painter paints with the help of his brush and creates beautiful images on canvas. So is the case with the poet. A poet uses beautiful words to create images, and the written word, it stands in front of us in the form of beautiful images, beautiful scenes, and captivating sights. Now, the question that would appear in the minds of the students is, what is meant by poetry? I would like to compare poetry to a woman. When we come across a woman, what is it that we are first of all attracted to? We look at her and we are attracted towards her physical appearance, her height, her physical structure, her fair complexion, her features, her dress. So all these are the physical attractions that attract us towards that woman. Same goes for the poem. When we look at the poem, what is it basically that attracts us towards the poem? We look at its structure. Is it a short poem? Is it a long poem? And after looking at the structure, then we see that what is there in the poem. Like a woman, when she speaks, when we listen to her, her voice, is it pleasing? Has she a audible kind of a voice? Is she has she a musical kind of a voice? So all these we come to know when she speaks to us. Same goes for the poem. When we start reading the poem starts speaking to us. The words in the poem, they tell us whether the poem is musical, has it got a rhyme in it? Has it got meter in it? Then what makes a woman look more beautiful? It's her adornment. The jewelry that she's wearing, the makeup that she's put up on, these all, the hairstyle she has, these all are what make a woman more beautiful. So goes for the poem. A simple, ordinary language would not appeal a reader. What appeals a reader is the beautiful use of language. The language is what makes a poem beautiful. And what kind of language it is? It's a figurative language that makes a poem look more appealing to us. It captivates the reader. It captures his heart and he is more interested to read the poem. Then when a woman speaks and when we interact with her, then we come to know what is there within her, what lies in her heart, what kind of a person she is. We then start understanding her. So goes for the poem. The connotative meaning of the poem. What do the words suggest? What are the inner meanings, the deeper meanings that lie in the words? What is behind the surface? As what is behind the apparent beauty of a woman. We come to understand that after a while. So is the case with the poem. Now, first of all, we are going to discuss what is meant by forms of poetry. There are different kinds of forms of poems that we come across. Narrative poem, it's the oldest kind of poem. When poetry started, it was initially written, or in fact not written, it was narrated orally, and from generations to generations, that is how it passed on. Later on, when writing became popular and writing came in vogue, then these poems they started got recorded. So a narrative poem is a poem that tells a story. And these narrative poems, they are usually contrasted with the lyrical poems. Then the second form that is very common and very popular, it's called the lyric poem. The lyrical poems, they took their origin in Greek literature. Lyre was a musical instrument, and the Greeks, they used to sing the poems in accompaniment with this musical instrument. The lyrical poems have another very specific quality, and that is that they express a speaker's personal thoughts or feelings. So they can be called as the expression of the poet's feelings of happiness, feelings of love, feelings of sorrow. So they are quite personal in nature. Then we move on to the humorous poems. Amongst the humorous poems, limerick is the most common poem that is in practice. It is a short poem with two long lines that rhyme with each other, followed by two short lines that rhyme with each other, and ending with a long line that rhymes with the first two. So that is, it has got 5 lines. Most of the time, it has a humorous purpose. Then we move on to the concrete poems. It's a kind of a poetry in which the meaning or effect is conveyed partly or wholly by visual means, using patterns of words or letters and other typographical devices. You would be able to understand this kind of poem in the following slides. Then, the most modern version of poetry is the free verse. Free verse has no fixed pattern of meter, rhyme, line length, or stanza arrangement. It became popular in the 20th century and it still continued. Now we are going to discuss these different forms of poetry one by one. Under the category of narrative poems come a list of poems, and these are the different forms of poems which have been very popular with poets and the British poets. They have tried their hands on these different forms. Ballad is a simple narrative poem. Basically, it's of folk origin. It's composed in short stanzas and it is adapted for singing. So the ballad poems, they basically used to narrate stories, and they were most of the time based on the folk tales which were popular during those days. Now, another important narrative kind of poetry is allegory. Allegory is the expressions by means of symbolic fictional figures and actions of truths or generalizations about human existence. And amongst allegories which were written in poetic forms, we have a very famous allegory by Spenser, that is Fairy Queen. It has the characters which were related to the daily life, normal life, because it was written in the time of Queen Elizabeth I. So the characters, they are mostly the courtly characters, and the characters, they also depict abstract qualities of human beings. So it is, you can say that it is symbolic on a very large level. Then we move on to the epic poems. The epic poems are very lengthy narrative poems, and most of the time they are concerned with very serious subjects, and the theme, or you can say the subject matter of the poem, it is related to entire universe, or it we can take the example of Paradise Lost, written by Milton. Paradise Lost deals with the subject of the fall of Adam and Eve, which is relevant to the entire universe. All human beings, they can relate to the subject of Paradise Lost. In the ancient Greece and Roman literature, the epics were very popular, and epics of Virgil and Homer, they dealt with the heroic deeds of heroes whose statures were above the normal human beings and who could be at conflict with the gods and goddesses of the Greek and Roman mythology. Then another important narrative kind of poetry that was written, and basically it was written in the 17th century, and Alexander Pope is most famous for trying his hands at this. It is called mock epic. Mock epic, it's a form of a satire in which trivial subjects, characters, and events are treated in the ceremonious manner and with the elevated language and elaborate devices characteristics of the epic style. That means the style, the language, the characters, they are all treated as the characters of an epic. But the subject matter is very trivial. So basically, the purpose of this epic was to mock at the trivialities of human nature. So this also falls in the category of narrative poems. Now we move on to the second category of different forms of poetry, and that is lyrical poems. Amongst the lyrical poems, we have such famous kind of poetry, that is ode, haiku, sonnet, and elegy. The odes were very popular form of poetry, which became a very loved kind of form, which was used by the romantic poets. An ode is a long, serious lyric poem that is elevated in tone and style, and some odes, they celebrate a person, an event, or even a power or object. So when we look into the literature of English, we see Keats as a most dominant, popular writer of odes. Haiku is a traditional, nature-inspired Japanese form of poetry that has got just 3 lines and 17 syllables. Lines 1 and 3 are 5 syllables each. Line 2 is 7 syllables. We as such don't see a lot of experimentation in this form of lyrical poetry. But when we move on to sonnet, we see that sonnet has been a very favorite form of poetry, not only with the Renaissance poets, but later on the Romantic poets also tried their hands on it. It's a lyrical poem which is of 14 lines. It is typically written in iambic pentameter, and it follows strict patterns of set, stanza division, and rhyme. So Shakespeare, Spenser, then that is the Renaissance poets, and then when we move on to the Romantic poets, we see Keats, Wordsworth. They wrote beautiful sonnets and contributed their role in the literature and in the writing of sonnets. Elegy is a song or poem which expresses a sorrow or lamentation, especially for one who is dead. And for this, we have a very good example of Tennyson's poem Break, 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 which he wrote for his dead friend. Now, here are some examples of the humorous poems. As you can see here, these are short poems and they strictly follow the structure that has been earlier discussed. Concrete poems are the fourth kind of poems that we come across. As you can see here in the picture, it's the drawing of a tree. The caption that is given to this is the nature. Within the diagram of the tree, you can see also the text that is written. That is what actually the poem is about. When we look closer to the text that reads is the nature. Do not burn the trees. Preserve them. They are precious. Otherwise, you will be killing yourself. So, through this, the poet has tried to convey a message. And these kind of poems are called as concrete poems. Now we move on to the fifth category or the fifth form of writing poetry, which is called as free verse. The example that has been given here is a 20th century poem written by Carl Sandburg. In this poem, we see that it does not have any rhyme scheme, it does not have any regular lines in it, no stanzaic pattern, and not a regular meter. It's a very brief poem. The fog comes on little feet. It sits looking over harbour and city on silent haunches and then moves on. When you look at the poem, it appears to be like a single stanza, a single sentence. This kind of poetry, it became popular in the 20th century because the 20th century rejected all the previous traditions of forms which were being used in poetry. So a new kind of form was introduced which was called free verse. Now let's discuss the structure of a poem. As a human body has got a structure based on arms, legs, head, similarly, a poem also has got a structure. And the main structure of a poem is composed of different stanzas. And when we define a stanza is a group of lines forming a unit in a poem or a song. So, a poem might have many stanzas, and these stanzas are considered to be the units, different units of a poem. Poets have experimented on different kinds of stanzaic patterns. Some of the important patterns are quatrain, and then we have couplets and rhyme royal. A quatrain is a stanzaic pattern which has got 4 lines. It is so important and it is so famous that Omar Khayyam has also used in his poetry this pattern, and in Arabic version it is called as rubaiyat. not only in Arabic but in Persian as well. So the Rubaiyat of Umar Khayyam are very famous. That is a 4-line stanza that is called a quatrain. Then we have got couplet. A couplet is as the word suggests itself, couple. It's a pair of rhyming lines in a poem, often set off from the rest of the poem. And Shakespeare's sonnets, they end in couplets. And Pope has also exploited this technique, this pattern in his poems, and his couplets are called as the heroic couplets. Then we have got rhyme royal. The rhyme royal stanza consists of 7 lines. It is usually in iambic pentameter, and the rhyme scheme that it follows is A B A B B B C C. Now we move on to another important component of poetry. This is what gives the poem a certain kind of balance in the structure. So, as a human body has got limbs which establish its structure. So, when each limb is in its proper proportion, then we like that person. Then that person's physical appearance appeals us. So is the case with the poem. A poem has to got a rhyme and meter so as to give an apparent proportionate structure. Rhyme is a popular literary device in which the repetition of the same or similar sounds occur in 2 or more words, usually at the end of the lines in poems or songs. In a rhyme in English, the vowel sounds in the stressed syllables are matching while the preceding consonant sound do not match. Now, again, rhyme is further categorized into 3 different kinds of rhymes. End rhyme is when the rhyming words they appear at the end of the line. For example, here they could not excuse the sin that was committed by his kin. Sin and kin, they are rhyming with each other. So as it was previously told that the vowel sounds, here the vowel sounds are I. They are matching, while the preceding consonant sounds, which are S and K, they are not matching with each other. So that is how the rhyme is produced here. Then we move on to the internal rhyme. The rhyme that occurs within a single line of poetry. For example, no baby, no, you may not go. No and go are rhyming, but they are within a line, not at the end of the line. Slant rhyme is another kind of rhyme where 2 words they sound similar but do not have a perfect rhyme. For example, the words jackal and buckle. Now they have got similar vowel sounds, they have similar consonant sounds at the end, but they do not perfectly rhyme with each other. So this is called as a slant rhyme. Now we move on to the rhyme scheme. What is meant by a rhyme scheme? The pattern that end rhymes form in a stanza or a poem is called the rhyme scheme. We've already discussed what is meant by end rhyme. The words which end at the lines and they rhyme with each other, they form the rhyme scheme. For example, here, roses are red, violets are blue, you stole my heart. Then were untrue. Here, as you can see, that red and heart are not rhyming with each other. Blue and untrue, they both are rhyming with each other. They have the same vowel sounds, they have the same consonant sounds at the end, though the consonant sounds at the beginning of the words are not similar, but they are rhyming with each other. So we designate an alphabetic letter to the rhyme scheme. So when we will analyze this stanza, we will say it has got a rhyme scheme of A, B, C, B. Another important part of poetry, or you can say of rhyme, is line break. A line break, or you can say repetition. This also creates a rhythmic effect in the poem. The repetition of words and the repetition of lines, they create a music in the poem. Like when we listen to a song, some of the songs, they have got lines which are often repeated by the singers so as to create music. Let's now look at this poem and see how this repetition is creating a rhythmic effect in the poem. It's a poem by Dorothy Parker, One Perfect Rose. A single flower he sent me since we met. All tenderly his messenger he chose. Deep hearted, pure with scented dew, still wet, one perfect rose. I knew the language of the flowerlet. My fragile leaves, it said, his heart enclose. Love long has taken for his amulet one perfect rose. Why is it no one ever sent me yet one perfect limousine? Do you suppose? Ah, no, it's always just my luck to get one perfect rose. So here we notice that the repetition of the line one perfect rose is adding not only to the rhyme of the poem, but it is lending a meaning to the poem. Another important aspect which has to be discussed in rhyme is line break. It's also called as enjambment, that is punctuation within the lines. Now, when we read a paragraph when it starts, it is composed of many sentences. When one sentence begins, the sentence, though it might be having punctuation marks, it ends on a full stop when the sentence is complete. But as far as poetry is concerned, because it's not written in the form of a paragraph, It is written in the form of lines. So when the poet feels that his sense is not complete and the line has to end, he puts a punctuation mark, not of course a full stop, and he carries on to the second line and maybe to the third line, and sometimes this goes on and on till the seventh or eighth line, and sometimes the entire poem. And we have such an example of a poem written by Philip Larkin where the entire poem is one sentence. So this is called as enjambment. And here the poet basically wants to convey to his reader that whatever thought he has in his mind is still flowing. It hasn't stopped. It is still flowing, and till there is a full stop, the sense is not complete. Now we move on to the meter. Meter is a set pattern of stressed and unstressed syllables in a line of poetry. The main metrical patterns are iambic, trochee, anapest, and dactyl. Now, as you can see here, the red marks are the marks of unstressed syllables. The yellow are those of stressed. When you go through the example here, attain. Now we are not putting any stress on the word, on the first syllable, that is a, and we are putting the stress on the second syllable, that is tain. So attain. Iambic is unstressed and stressed. That is the pattern of an iambic meter. When we go on to the trochee, it is stressed and unstressed. Tiger. Now we have stressed on the first syllable, that is tie. G, we don't put any stress on it. Anapaste has got two unstressed syllables and one stressed. Underfoot. Then we move on to the dactyl. It has got two stressed and one unstressed. Typical. So this is how you see that the meter is used by the poets in the poem to create rhythm in the poem. The most common meter that is used in English poetry is iambic meter. And it is, again, as I've already told, that it is the metrical unit of iambic meter consists of an unstressed syllable followed by a stressed syllable. So here I will read a poem, Virtue by George Herbert, and we'll see how this iambic meter is being followed. Sweet day, so cool, so calm, so bright, the bridal of the earth and sky. The dew shall weep thy fall tonight, for thou must die. Now we are moving on to the very important characteristic of poetry, that is sound and music. As I told you earlier, that when we look at a woman, of course her physical appearance, it appeals us, but there are some things which further enhance her beauty, and that is her probably makeup, her jewelry, her designer wear dress, her beautiful shoes. They are further complementing her physical appearance. So is the case with the poem. The sound effects which are there in the poem, they add to the beauty of the poem. One by one, I'm going to discuss all of them. So the first one that we are going to discuss is alliteration. When the first sounds in words they repeat, that is called as alliteration. Let us look at an example. Peter Piper picked a pickled pepper. Slim Pinion swallows sweep and pass. Rain races ripping like wind. Its restless rage rattles like rocks ripping through the air. So you see here the highlighted consonant sounds are being repeated in a line, and the repetition of these sounds, it is called as alliteration. It is a very important tool that is used by the poets to create beauty in the poem. Then we move on to consonance. Consonance is the repetition of the same consonant sounds within words which are close together. For example, such weight and thick pink bulk. I dropped the locket in the thick mud. Eric liked the black book and the silken, sad, uncertain rustling of each purple curtain. Now, if you can see here in these examples, the same consonant sound is being repeated and it comes close to the next word. For example, in the first sentence, think, pink, bulk. The K sound, which is a consonant sound, it is recurring in 3 words. In the second line, it's locket and thick. Again, the K sound is appearing very close. And the third, it's Eric liked black book. Again, that is a K sound which is appearing closely in one line. In the fourth line, it's the S sound. Silken, sad, uncertain, rustling. So these all consonant sounds, they might appear in one line very close to each other, giving a very musical effect to the poem. Assonance, which is again another important element of creating music in the poem, is the repetition of the same or similar vowel sound within nearby words. For example, here, the trodden town rang its cobbles for luck. Do you like blue? So in the first sentence, it's the O sound that is a vowel sound which is appearing in the same line repeatedly. In the second example, it's the U sound. Do you like blue? So that is how the poet uses different tools and different techniques to give music in his poem. Like a painter uses different colors. Sometimes he merges different colors to create a new color in order to give the image that he's painting a unique kind of an appearance. So is the case with the poet as well. The poet also plays with words. The poet plays with sounds so as to make his poem a beautiful and a wonderful experience for the reader. This is a very interesting tool that a poet uses. It's called as Onomatopoeia. And we are though quite familiar with this word because we most of the time use it, but people don't understand what is meant by onomatopoeia. For example, you might have come across on a road when the two cars they collide with each other. The sound that they produce is a crashing sound. Or sometimes when the clock is clicking, it's the click clock, click clock, click clock kind of a sound. When the bell is ringing, ting, 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 ting. When the water, when you throw something into the water, there's a splash kind of a sound. So these words, that is click clock, splash, tick tock, tingling, hissing of a snake, chattering of the children, chirping of the birds, these words they themselves convey a sound. So this is what is meant by onomatopoeia. Here I would like to read a poem which is a very beautiful example of onomatopoeia. The rusty spigot sputter utters a sputter, spatters a smattering of drops, gashes wider, slash, splatters, scatters, spurts, finally stops sputtering and plash, gushes, rushes, splashes, clear water dashes. So it's an example of a tap which is not giving out water in its normal routine. There's some technical problem in the tap, and the water that is coming out of the tap, the sounds that it is making, this is what is called again onomatopoeia. Now we move on to the most interesting part of poetry. How is a poem decorated? What are the techniques the poet uses to make the language of the poem beautiful and suggesting layers and layers of meaning? Now, what is meant by figurative language? As I discussed earlier, that when we look at a person, we are more focused towards his physical appearance, his features, his body, his complexion, his hair. These are the things that first attract us. Then slowly and gradually we move towards other things, the adornments that he has used to enhance his personality. They might be jewelry, it might be the hair dye that he's using, it can be a very trendy dress that he or she is using, it can be the brand shoes that he's wearing. So these are the accessories which further enhance and give importance to that person. So goes for poetry as well. And the figures of speech, they play the role of adorning a piece of writing. When a poet writes a poem, he uses the aid of figurative language in order to bring color, beauty, and refinement to his poem. So, first of all, we are going to discuss simile. It's the most simple as well as the most common figure of speech that is used by the poets. It's a comparison of two things, and while the comparison is being made, such words as like or as are used to compare two different things with each other. For example, my mind is like an open book. He sprinted as fast as a cheetah to the finish line. Buster barks like broken alarm clock. In the first example, now instead of writing that my mind is simple, the poet has compared his mind to an open book which can be read by anybody. So his mind is as simple as a book which can be read. So he's comparing his mind to an open book. In the second instance, we see that the speed of a person is being compared to the speed of a cheetah. In the third one, the barking of a dog is being compared to the broken alarm clock. So, this is how a sentence which could otherwise be written in a very simple manner would probably not have any impact on the reader. But here, when a simile is used, it adds flavor to the sentence. The sentence becomes rich and it attracts the reader. The second figure of speech that is again used by the poets is metaphor. A metaphor, it compares one thing to another by stating that something is something else. For example, white gleaming stars are diamonds in the midnight sky. The snow is a white, fluffy blanket covering the field. Sam is King Kong when he is mad. So, as you can see here, that the words which are colored red, which are in red font, they are being compared to the ones which are in yellow font. That is, the gleaming stars, they are diamonds. Snow is a fluffy blanket. Sam is King Kong. Now, the basic of comparison is the gleaming stars. The shining of the stars is like the diamonds. The white color of the snow, the white color and the softness of the snow is being compared to the fluffy blanket. The anger of Sam is being compared to the anger of King Kong. So the comparisons are unlike similes, but the comparisons are very much there. And this is another way, or you can say another figure of speech, which is very oftenly used by the poets in poetry. Now we move on to personification. As the word suggests, person. That means when we attribute human qualities to something which is not human. For example, the bare branches grabbed me as I ran through the woods. The collie seemed to smile as his owner rubbed his ears. The popcorn jumped right out of the popping machine. So all these three words, grabbed, smiled, and jumped, these are the actions which are done by human beings. And the branches, they are grabbing, the coolie is smiling, and the popcorn is jumping. So inhuman things are performing the job of human beings. So this is called personification. Here I would like to read to you a poem, a very interesting one, where a vacuum cleaner has been personified. The house is quiet now. The vacuum cleaner sulks in the corner closet, its bag limp as a stopped lung, its mouth grinning into the floor, maybe at my slovenly life, my dog-dead youth. I've lived this way long enough, but when my old woman died, her soul went into that vacuum cleaner, and I can't bear to see the bag swell like a belly, eating the dust and the woolen mice, and begin to howl because there's old filth everywhere she used to crawl, in corner and under the stair. I know how I know now how life is cheap as dirt, and still the hungry, angry heart hangs on and howls, biting at air. So the highlighted words, they show that this vacuum has been personified. The death of the wife of the owner of this vacuum has made the soul of the wife leave the body of that woman and enter into the vacuum. So the vacuum has started performing these tasks in a similar way as the poet's wife used to do. Hyperbole. This is an extreme form of exaggeration, and it's used by the poets when they want to emphasize something. They use this figure of speech. For example, I'm so hungry I could eat a whole chicken. It rained buckets during the game this morning. Megan was so mad, fume rose from her head. So, all these three examples, it's impossible for a person to eat a whole chicken. It's impossible for rain to rain so extensively that the buckets they that the rain it comes in the form of buckets, and then when one becomes angry, how can fume come out of a head of a person to show his anger? So these all are the techniques which are used to exaggerate a certain point, and this is called as hyperbole. Now we move on to oxymoron. It's a phrase which consists of contradictory terms, and the purpose of this is to create dramatic effect. Examples such as wise fool, living death, deafening silence, these are used in order to create a dramatic effect in the poem. Paradox is a statement that at first appears contradictory, but which, on closer examination, proves to claim the truth. For example, to save this city, we have to destroy it. Like in the present scenario, when we are facing the coronavirus outbreak, all over the world, a lockdown has been imposed. Now, apparently, this lockdown it appears to destroy the economy of the entire world, but it is there to save the world from this disease. Similarly, in another example, I must be cruel only to be kind. This is mostly practiced by parents. Sometimes they impose cruel restrictions which are considered cruel by the children. But in the longer run, such kind of disciplinary cruelties, they pave the way for their children and they turn them into successful citizens. So, in other words, it's a kindness but in the garb of cruelty. So, that is how paradox also enhances the beauty of poetry. Pun is a technique which most of the time creates humor in the poem. And one of very famous English poet, Alexander Pope, is known to use puns in his poem. Let's look at the example. I've been to the dentist many times, so I know the drill. Now, the word drill here has got more than one meanings. It means the practice of going to the dentist, and the other meaning is the drill machine. So, again, the purpose is to create humor in the poem and to further emphasize the meaning of the poem, what the poet wants to convey, what he wants his reader to enjoy. So, these are the different techniques that he uses. Apostrophe is a figure of speech which consists of words which address an inanimate object, abstract idea, or deceased individuals as though that object, idea, or person were alive. So, an apostrophe is an address to such objects which are not living, but when the address is made, it appears as if they are standing in front of us. For example, O death, where is thy sting? So, death here is being addressed, which is an abstract idea, but it appears as if death is standing in front of the addressee and he is talking to him. So, an apostrophe is also a very important figure of speech which is used by the poets. Allusion is a reference to a famous literary, mythical, biblical, or historical figure or event. This is most of the time used by poets who have a very strong command over history, over mythology, over politics, over religion, and they make references. Basically, these references are comparisons. By picking up a historical or a biblical or a mythological reference and relating it to the present situation, the poet is trying to drive home his purpose, his idea. And let's look at this example that is stated here. Chocolate was his Achilles' heel. Achilles was a Greek mythological hero, a very strong person, but his weakness it lied in his heel. So here what the poet is trying to make us understand is that chocolate is his weakness. So if you want him to do anything, you should lure him with a chocolate. So again, this is how allusions are used in poetry. Synecdoche is a kind of a metaphor in which a part of something represents the whole. For example, 3 sails just entered the harbor. Now the 3 sails are the 3 ships. Instead of using the word ship, because if the poet had said 3 ships just entered the harbor, it would not have created the kind of poetic effect that he wanted to. So when he says 3 sails just entered the harbor, it creates a certain kind of a poetic effect. Then, in the next example, when Queen Elizabeth dies, Prince Charles will take over the throne. Now, a throne is just a part of the whole, that is the whole country. So, or another example, that so many tongues were wagging at them. So many tongues were wagging at them means that so many people were talking about them. But by using this phrase, tongues wagging at them, the poet has again tried to drive home his meaning in a very poetic manner. Metonymy is a type of metaphor in which something closely associated with a subject is substituted for it. For example, the pen is mightier than the sword. Now, we immediately understand from this statement that pen does not mean the literal pen, or sword does not mean the literal sword. Pen here means men of letters, the scribes, the poets, the thinkers, and sword means the soldiers, the fighters. So, what the poet here is trying to convey is that thinkers, philosophers, writers, poets, they are much more stronger than the soldiers and the fighters. So that is how you see that with the play of words, the poets, they create beautiful pieces of literature. Now we move on to imagery. These all figures of speech, they play hand in hand to create beautiful images. And when we talk about imagery, it means that the senses the poem evokes in the reader and helps the reader to see the poem. That is what is meant by imagery. So again, I will go back to the example of a painter. That a painter sets up his canvas. He picks and chooses his colors. He has got something in his mind and he wants to put that something on the canvas. So he has got different kinds of brushes, he's got different kinds of colors. Sometimes he mixes the colors, the primary colors, and creates new colors of his own. And then he transfers all that on the canvas. So that image which is in his mind, it is now produced on the paper, on the canvas for us to see. Similarly, a poet also who uses all these, the structure, the rhyme, the meter, the music, figures of speech, these all are used to create images. And these images, they evoke or senses all our five senses are evoked by these images. These are the senses of sound, senses of sight, touch, smell, taste, and emotions. So, all these tools, all these instruments which the poet uses to create images, these images, they entice our senses. So let's see how our senses are enticed. Now let's see here visual imagery. Imagery that deals with picturing something. That is, it's the sense of sight which is evoked. When we read the words which are creating pictures, we imagine them and we imagine them in our sight. We feel as if these images are there standing in front of us. For example, here, the dark black cloud began to block the azure blue sky as we sat and watched on the beach. So, all these words, dark, black, cloud, azure, blue sky, beach, these all words, they are themselves pictures. When we read this line, we immediately imagine the scene. Now we move on to the auditory images. This kind of imagery, it deals with sound and hearing. For example, the doorbell rang and Rana screamed, "I'll get it." So when this sentence is written, we can easily imagine hearing the doorbell ringing. Then the olfactory imagery, it represents smell. The garbage can release an odor of rancid 3-week-old milk. Gustatory imagery, it represents a taste. Mark tasted the briny, bitter salt water for the first time. I'm here giving you just examples with the images so that you can understand that how words, they create these different images. Images of sound, images of sight, images of taste, images of smell. Tactile imagery, it represents touch. She dug her toes in the wet sand, but she was still sweating from the hot sun. So, when such words are used by the poet, which make you feel that if you are touching that thing, what would you feel? So, this is how images are created with the interplay of these five senses. Last but not the least is the denotative and connotative aspects of the poem. Denotation means a literal meaning, that is, a dictionary meaning of a word. When we are analyzing a poem, we first look at the literal meaning of the poem. The literal meaning of the poem, it leads us towards the connotative meaning of the poem. And connotation, it refers to a meaning that is implied by a word apart from the thing which it describes explicitly. Because words, they carry cultural and emotional associations or meanings in addition to their literal meanings or denotations. So connotation has a significant role to play in a poem, because through the connotative use of words, the poet tries to convey his message more explicitly. This leads on to the use of symbols. A symbol is a person, place, thing, or event that stands for itself and for something beyond itself as well. For example, the American flag, it symbolizes freedom, liberty, and love for America. A crown might symbolize kingdom. A white flag, it symbolizes peace. A wedding band symbolizes marriage. So, words, they have connotative meanings as well. Some of the prominent symbols that are used in literature by most of the poets are related to the seasons: spring, summer, fall, winter. These all seasons, they have a lot of connotative meanings. Spring, it can be taken as birth, rebirth, new beginnings, new life, youth, happiness. Similarly, when we look at summer, summer is considered to be the prime of life, when you are energetic, when you are growing. Fall is considered to be the decline, that is the approach of death. Winter is a symbol which is normally used to connotate death, the end of life, something which comes to an end, infertility. Then, when we move on to such symbols as day and night, they also have a lot of meanings. The beginning of a day, that is the dawn, is the beginning of new life. Day or the daylight is considered synonymous with goodness, with knowledge, with honesty, happiness, purity, clarity, energy, beginning of a new life. And the darkness of night has its own symbolic, or you can say connotative meanings. The darkness of night, it can be interpreted as death, evil, darkness, mystery, negativity, ignorance. So it again depends upon the poet, that how is he using a certain word, what connotation that particular word has in relation to the poem that he is writing. Because that connotative meaning of the word, it enhances, it adds to the meaning, to the theme, to the message that the poet wants to convey through his poem. Now we have discussed in detail all the elements of of poetry. We have discussed that what are the essential components that are required to write a poem. Before I end my lecture, I would like to take a brief review of what we have done. I will be going back to the first page so as to recap what we have done. So poetry, when we started off with the discussion of poetry, we divided poetry into 6 main elements. The first and the foremost important part of poetry was form. And under this heading, we discussed different forms of poetry. We discussed narrative poetry, we discussed lyrical poetry, we discussed humorous poetry, concrete poems, free verse. Then we moved on to the structure of the poem, that what kind of stanzaic patterns are used by the poets. Then we went on to discuss the rhyme and the meter, and then how music and sound they add to the poem. Then we discuss different figures of speech. How do they adorn a poem? How do they further beautify a poem? And then the choice of vocabulary by the poet. Why is he using a specific word? Does that word have a literal meaning or has it got a connotative meaning? So these all elements of poetry, they define what poetry is, and they most of the time differentiate a piece of poetry from prose. I hope my lecture has been sufficient and it has cleared a lot of doubts in your mind. Thank you.